The obsidian chamber of the High Council did not smell of war. It smelled of stale incense and the dry, suffocating dust of 3,000 years of peace. Princess Illyria stood in the center of the floor, the violet bioluminescence of her skin pulsing with a suppressed rage that threatened to crack her porcelain composure. Above her, the 7 elders of Zetharian sat on floating dais chairs, their robes cascading like waterfalls of silver silk. They looked down at her with the pity one might reserve for a frightened child. "We cannot authorize the activation of the Terran protocols," High Counselor Zalor intoned, his voice vibrating through the floor via the acoustic amplifiers in his throat. "It is heresy. The humans were a plague. They burned half the galaxy before they burned themselves out. To invite their methods back into our domain is to invite rot into a healthy body." Illyria stepped forward, her boots clicking sharply against the black glass floor. "The Exarch is not a theory," she said, her voice low but cutting through the cavernous room. "They are not a ghost story to frighten younglings. 3 scouting outposts in the Vale sector have gone dark in the last 10 days. No distress signals, no debris, just silence. That is their signature. They are returning, and we are debating etiquette while they sharpen their knives." "The Dominion is extinct," Zalor replied, dismissing her with a wave of a 6-fingered hand. "Those outposts likely suffered from solar flare interference. The vote stands. Princess, the motion is denied. You will return to your quarters and prepare for the solstice rites. We will handle the defense of the realm." Illyria looked at them, ancient, powerful, and lethally arrogant. They remembered the Golden Age. They did not remember the screams. She bowed, a stiff, mechanical motion. "As you command, High Counselor." She turned and walked out, her spine rigid. She did not return to her quarters. She did not prepare for the solstice rites. Instead, she activated the stealth protocols on her personal wristcom, effectively vanishing from the palace sensors, and took the long, spiraling service lift down into the bedrock of the planet. She was going to the grave of history. The reliquary was a vault forbidden to everyone save the High Council. But Illyria had stolen her father's genetic key codes 3 days before his death. The air down here was recycled and tasted of copper. Rows of hard light servers stretched into the darkness, humming with the imprisoned data of 1,000,000 galactic criminals, warlords, and monsters. Illyria approached the central console. The interface recognized her biosignature and flared to life, casting a harsh blue light over her angular features. "Search query," she commanded. "Species, Terran, era, the expansion wars, parameters, tactical genius, unconventional warfare, excessive brutality rating, status, living." The machine whirred, processing petabytes of forgotten history. Thousands of faces flickered and vanished. The humans had been a violent, short-lived species, prone to destroying what they could not conquer. But they had possessed an instinct for survival that the refined Zetharian lacked. The screen settled on a single image. It was a man. His skin was pale, scarred, and weathered. His eyes the color of a stormy ocean on a water world. He looked tired even in the hologram. Name, Jacob Rain. Rank, Commander, former United Earth Coalition. Designation, the Wolf of Centauri. Crimes, destruction of a civilian orbital habitat to halt a viral outbreak. Status, exiled. Current location, Othras 4, mining sector. Illyria stared at the face. This man had burned a city to save a planet. He was a monster. "He is perfect," she whispered. Othras 4 was a rock that God had forgotten and the devil had leased out for strip mining. The atmosphere was a toxic soup of sulfur and particulate matter, breathable only because of the massive terraforming scrubbers that groaned constantly in the distance. The settlement of Black Ridge was a collection of pressurized hab modules rusted by the acid rain. In the center of the squalor sat the Last Drop, a bar that catered to miners who wanted to forget how much they owed the company store. Jacob Rain sat in the back corner, nursing a glass of synthetic whiskey that tasted like kerosene and regrets. He was 45 years old, but in the dim, flickering light of the bar, he looked 60. His knuckles were scarred, and his left shoulder ached where a plasma bolt had cooked the muscle 10 years ago. He watched the room. He always watched the room. It was a habit he could not break, like breathing or nightmares. The door hissed open, letting in a swirl of reddish dust. A figure walked in, wrapped in a heavy scavenger's cloak, face obscured by a rebreather mask. The stranger moved with a fluid grace that did not belong to a mining world. The miners moved like heavy machinery, clumsy and loud. This person moved like water. Jacob took a sip of his drink. Trouble. The stranger walked to the bar. A massive Zetherian miner, a four-armed brute named Krog who had been drinking since noon, leaned over. "You are in my spot, little thing." Krog grunted, shoving a massive hand toward the stranger. The stranger did not flinch. Jacob saw the shift in weight before it happened. The stranger stepped inside Krog's guard, a movement so fast it was a blur. One hand grabbed Krog's lower wrist, twisting it against the joint, while a booted foot smashed into the alien's knee. There was a sickening crunch of chitin. Krog roared and swung his upper arms. The stranger ducked, sliding under the blow, and drove a palm upward into the nerve cluster under Krog's jaw. The giant crumbled like a collapsing building. The bar went silent. Jacob sighed. He set his glass down. That was military-grade CQC, close-quarters combat. No scavenger fought like that. 3 of Krog's friends stood up, drawing jagged mining knives. The stranger turned to face them, stance wide, hands loose. Jacob stood up. He didn't want to be involved. He really didn't. But he hated unfair odds, and he hated interrupted drinks. He picked up the heavy glass bottle of whiskey from the table. "Gentlemen," Jacob rasped, his voice like gravel in a mixer. "Unless you want to explain to the foreman why you can't work tomorrow because your hands are broken, I suggest you sit down." One of the miners lunged at him. Jacob didn't even blink. He smashed the bottle across the miner's face, spun, and kicked the second man in the solar plexus, sending him flying over a table. The third miner looked at his fallen friends, looked at Jacob, and dropped his knife. Jacob looked at the stranger in the cloak. "You have a hell of a right hook, kid, but you pick lousy drinking buddies." The stranger reached up and unclasped the rebreather mask. The hood fell back, revealing shimmering violet skin, high cheekbones, and eyes that burned with royal authority. "Commander Jacob Rain," Princess Illyria said. Her voice was melodic, out of place in the grime. "I require your services." Jacob stared at her. Then, he threw his head back and laughed. It was a dry, barking sound. "A princess," he said, wiping whiskey off his hand. "On Othras 4. If this is a hallucination, it is the most expensive one I have ever had." "I am not a hallucination," she said, stepping closer, "and I am not here to play games. The Zetherian Empire is in danger. I need a soldier who understands war in the mud." Jacob's smile vanished. He sat back down, picking up a shard of glass from the broken bottle and toying with it. "I am retired, Your Highness. And your people made it very clear what they thought of my kind when the treaties were signed. We are savages. Remember, we were wrong," Illyria said. She reached out, placing her hand on his arm to emphasize her plea. Jacob flinched. It was a violent, involuntary spasm. He jerked his arm back as if she were red-hot iron. His eyes went wide, dilating with a flash of pure panic before the mask of indifference slammed back down. The scar on the back of his hand, a jagged brand from a torture camp in the Vale sector, throbbed. "Don't," he warned, his voice dropping an octave. "Don't touch me." Illyria froze, her hand hovering in the air. She saw the fear in the eyes of the predator. It was a confusing dichotomy. "I apologize," she said softly. "Go home." "Princess," Jacob said, turning away. "Find some other ghost to haunt. I am done fighting wars that don't belong to me." He threw a credit chip on the table to cover the damage and walked out into the toxic night. Illyria followed him. She was not used to being refused. Her stealth cruiser was docked at the edge of the settlement, concealed by a refraction field. "Commander, wait!" she called out, the wind whipping her cloak around her legs. Jacob kept walking toward the landing pads. "You are persistent. I will give you that." As they approached the edge of the canyon where the landing pads jutted out over the abyss, Illyria felt a sudden, sharp vibration in the ground. It wasn't the mining drills. It was distinct, mechanical. "Get down!" Jacob roared, spinning around. He tackled her just as the landing pad exploded. A fireball of orange and black engulfed the space where they had been standing a second before. The force of the blast threw them backward into the dirt. Debris rained down, chunks of durasteel and burning insulation. Illyria's vision swam. Her ears rang with a high-pitched whine. She tried to move, but a heavy beam from the docking structure had fallen across her legs, pinning her. Above her, the sky was choked with smoke. Through the haze, she saw shadows moving. Drones. Assassin drones, sleek and black, hovering silently, their weapon mounts glowing red as they charge for a second volley. She struggled, panic rising in her chest. It was just like before. Flashback. The royal shuttle. She was 10 years old. Her brother, Kalen, was laughing, showing her the new star chart he had made. Then, the breach, the screech of metal tearing, the Exarch boarding party, nightmares of chrome and flesh, Kalen shoving her into the escape pod. The look in his eyes, not fear, but resignation, the pod launching. Through the viewport, she saw the shuttle disintegrate. She had banged on the glass until her hands bled, screaming his name into the void. End flashback. Illyria gasped, the memory paralyzing her as much as the steel beam. The drone locked onto her. A red laser dot danced on her forehead. Then a shadow eclipsed the red light. Jacob was there. He had lost his jacket in the blast. His shirt was torn, revealing a map of scars across his back. He didn't look terrified. He looked alive. He picked up a piece of jagged rebar from the wreckage. With a roar that sounded more animal than human, he hurled it like a javelin. The metal rod struck the hovering drone squarely in its intake turbine. The machine sparked, spun wildly, and crashed into the canyon wall, exploding in a shower of sparks. 2 more drones swooped down. Jacob didn't run. He slid behind a slab of concrete, drawing a heavy kinetic pistol from a holster at the small of his back, a weapon she hadn't even seen him carrying. Crack, crack. 2 shots, no wasted energy. The first drone took a round to its sensor array and dropped. The second tried to bank, but Jacob led the target perfectly. The bullet punched through the fuel cell. Silence returned to the canyon, broken only by the crackle of flames. Jacob holstered the weapon and ran to her. He braced his shoulder under the massive durasteel beam pinning her legs. "This is going to hurt," he grunted. With a groan of exertion, the veins in his neck bulging, he lifted the beam. It was hundreds of pounds of dead weight. He shouldn't have been able to move it, but he did. Illyria scrambled free, gasping for air. Jacob dropped the beam, the ground shaking with the impact. He offered her a hand to pull her up. She looked at him. He was bleeding from a cut above his eyebrow. His chest was heaving, but his eyes were clear. The dull, haunted look was gone, replaced by a sharp, terrifying focus. "Who sent those?" he asked. I don't know," Illyria stammered. "They must have tracked my ship." Sabotage. Jacob looked at the burning wreckage of her cruiser, then back at her. "Someone wants you dead, Princess. And they used military-grade hunter-killers to do it." He wiped the blood from his eye. "You asked if I would fight," he said. Illyria looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the violence coiled in his muscles, the tactical calculation running behind his eyes. She whispered to herself, the words barely audible over the wind. "He will fight." "I'll go with you," Jacob said. "But not for your counsel, and not for your gold. I'm going because whoever sent those drones just made it personal. I don't like being shot at before I've finished my drink." He leaned in close, his voice hard. "But we do this my way. Full autonomy. I run the security protocols. I train your men how I see fit. And if the council gets in my way, I walk. Are we clear?" "Crystal," Illyria said, her heart hammering against her ribs. "We take my ship," Jacob said, gesturing toward a battered, ugly freighter sitting on a lower pad. "It's not pretty, but it has guns that work." The journey back to Zytharian Prime took 4 days via the hyperlanes. Jacob's ship, the Iron Lung, was a stark contrast to the royal vessels Illyria was accustomed to. It smelled of grease, ozone, and old coffee. To conserve life support for the long jump, they had to utilize the cryostasis chamber. The ship only had one functioning high-grade unit meant for long-haul transport. The other was broken. "It's a dual pod," Jacob explained as he punched coordinates into the nav computer. "It was designed for medevac. 2 people, 1 cycle. It links biorhythms to prevent stasis sickness." Illyria hesitated. "It means we will be connected?" "Physically and mentally," Jacob said, not looking at her. "You'll feel my heartbeat. I'll feel yours. You might see flashes of memory, and it's disorienting if you aren't used to it." "I can handle it," she said, lifting her chin. They climbed into the narrow pod. It was incredibly tight. Illyria had to press her back against the padded wall, and Jacob lay opposite her, their bodies inches apart. As the glass lid hissed shut, the air was sucked out, replaced by the freezing stasis gas. The cold hit her like a physical blow. She gasped. "Breathe." Jacob's voice came, not through her ears, but directly into her mind. It was the neural link establishing connection. "Just breathe." She felt his presence flood her senses. It was overwhelming. She felt the phantom pain in his shoulder. She felt the jagged edges of his memories, fire, screaming, the smell of burning hair. But beneath the trauma, there was a profound, aching loneliness, a silence so deep it felt like the bottom of the ocean. He hadn't touched a living soul with kindness in years. She realized she was trembling, not from the cold, but from the intimacy. Jacob shifted, his hand inadvertently brushing against her hip in the cramped space. He pulled back instantly, the mental flare of panic hitting her mind. "Sorry," he thought. 6 years, Illyria whispered, though her lips didn't move. "You haven't been close to anyone in 6 years." The thought hung between them in the neural drift. "I am a soldier." Jacob's thought came back, defensive and brittle. "Solitude is safer." Illyria looked at him through the frost forming on her eyelashes. She felt his heartbeat slowing down, syncing with hers. Thump, 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 thump. "I have been surrounded by guards and courtiers my entire life," she projected back to him, a confession slipping out before she could stop it. I have been dressed, painted, and paraded, but I have never been touched. Not really. Not like a person, only like an object, a symbol. She felt his surprise. It softened the jagged edges of his mind. Go to sleep, princess, Jacob thought, his mental voice gentler now. We have a war to start when we wake up. The darkness took them, their breaths mingling in the frost, two ghosts haunting the same machine. They broke the atmosphere over Zetherian Prime at dawn. The capital city was a sprawling jewel of crystal spires and floating gardens, bathed in the golden light of the twin suns, and it was beautiful. And to Jacob it looked like a target-rich environment. He landed the Iron Lung on the private royal pad, bypassing the traffic control protocols with codes Illyria provided. As the ramp lowered, steam hissing from the hydraulic seals, a reception committee was already waiting. But it was not a welcome party. A dozen royal guards, armored in ceremonial gold and white, stood in a semicircle, energy pikes leveled at the ship. Behind them stood General Varex, Illyria's cousin. He was tall, handsome in a sharp, predatory way, and wore the insignia of the High Command. Illyria walked down the ramp first, her head high. Jacob followed a step behind, his hand resting casually near the pistol at his hip. Princess, Varex called out, his voice smooth but cold. The council is in an uproar. You disappeared for a week, and now you return in a garbage scow, bringing this with you. He gestured to Jacob as if he were a stain on the carpet. This is Commander Jacob Rain, Illyria announced, her voice echoing across the landing pad. He is here by my personal invitation to consult on planetary security. Security? Varex laughed. He stepped forward, looking Jacob up and down. He looks like a vagrant. You have broken the edict of separation, Illyria. The council is debating stripping you of your title at this very moment. You have brought a human into the sacred city. Jacob stepped forward. He didn't bow. He didn't salute. He just stared at Varex with eyes that had seen civilizations burn. Nice armor, Jacob said dryly. Does it come in men's sizes? The guards stiffened, their pikes glowing brighter. Varex's eyes narrowed. You have a loose tongue, human, Varex hissed. And you have a loose perimeter, Jacob countered. We came in on a heavy freighter, unauthorized, and I had a firing solution on your command center for 3 minutes before we touched down. If I were the Exarch, you would all be dead already. Varex flushed a deep violet. Illyria stepped between them. Enough. Commander Rain is under my protection. If the council wishes to debate it, they can do so with me. Until then, he has the run of the palace. She turned to Jacob. Come. As they walked past the line of guards, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Rumors were already flying through the city data nets. The princess had gone rogue. The princess had brought a monster home. Jacob glanced at Illyria as they entered the grand hallway. You sure you know what you're doing? Princess, he muttered. They look ready to hang us both. Illyria didn't look at him. She looked straight ahead at the throne room doors. No, she said softly. I don't. But the drums are beating. Jacob, can you hear them? Jacob listened. He didn't hear drums. He heard the silence before the artillery barrage, loud and clear, he said. He walked beside her into the heart of the empire he was about to tear apart. The training arena of the Zetherian Royal Guard was a masterpiece of architectural intimidation. It was a sunken amphitheater of polished obsidian, surrounded by rising tiers of seating where the idle nobility could watch their soldiers practice the art of dying. The floor was etched with glowing ley lines that hummed with low-grade energy, designed to test the footwork and balance of the combatants. Jacob Rain hated it. He stood in the center of the circle, stripped to the waist, sweat making the scars on his torso glisten under the harsh white floodlights. Across from him stood Sub-Commander Valen, a warrior of impeccable lineage and skill. Valen held a dual-bladed plasma staff, a weapon of elegance and reach. He moved through the opening forms of the Kethron, the dance of the wind, spinning the weapon with a fluidity that made the humming blade sing a high, clear note. Jacob held nothing. He stood with his weight settled on his back foot, hands loose at his sides, watching the performance with heavy-lidded boredom. Around the upper tiers, 100 soldiers and courtiers watched in silence. They expected the human to be cut to ribbons. They wanted to see the savage put in his place. "Begin!" the arbiter shouted from the high box. Valen lunged. It was a beautiful strike, a sweeping arc meant to disarm and humiliate. The plasma blade hissed through the air, aiming to sear the flesh of Jacob's shoulder just enough to force a submission. Jacob did not step back. He stepped in. To the Zetherian mind, war was geometry. It was lines, angles, and the preservation of momentum. To Jacob, war was physics and pain. He ducked under the high guard, moving inside the reach of the long staff. Before Valen could retract the weapon, Jacob slammed his left forearm into the alien's chest, checking his forward momentum, and drove his right fist into the soft cartilage of Valen's lower ribs. The sound was like a dry branch snapping in a winter forest. Valen gasped, the air rushing out of his lungs in a pained wheeze. The elegance shattered. He stumbled back, trying to bring the staff around for a killing stroke, abandoning the ritual. Jacob didn't give him the time. He kicked Valen's knee, shattering the joint backward. As the noble fell, Jacob caught the plasma staff, wrenched it from Valen's grip, and deactivated it. With a fluid motion, he tossed the weapon aside and grabbed Valen by the throat, slamming him into the obsidian floor. Jacob's fist hovered an inch above Valen's face. The sub-commander stared up, eyes wide with shock and agony. "Dead," Jacob said flatly. He stood up and walked away, leaving the moaning noble on the floor. The arena was dead silent. The spectators were horrified. This was not combat as they knew it. There was no honor in it. There was no exchange of blows, no testing of spirit. It was efficient, brutal, and ugly. "You fight like a beast," a voice rang out from the stands. Lord Calith, a high-ranking noble, leaned over the railing, his face flushed with violet indignation. "There is no art in this. You simply break things." Jacob looked up, shielding his eyes against the lights. "Art hangs on a wall," Jacob called back, his voice rough and carrying easily to the top tier. "If you want to dance, hire a ballerina. If you want to keep the Exarch from skinning you alive and wearing your face as a trophy, you listen to me. The Exarch doesn't care about your stance. They don't care about your lineage. They care about how fast you die." He spat on the polished floor, a supreme insult in Zetherian culture, and walked toward the exit tunnel. The corridor leading to the barracks was cool and shadowed, a relief from the glare of the arena. Jacob grabbed a towel from a service drone and wiped the sweat from his face. His adrenaline was fading, replaced by the familiar ache in his joints. A figure detached itself from the shadows of a decorative alcove. "You broke his leg," Princess Illyria said. Her voice was neutral, but the air around her felt charged. She was wearing formal court robes, layers of shimmering silk that made her look like a statue of a goddess rather than a living woman. "He'll heal." Jacob grunted, not breaking stride. "Their medical tech is better than mine. He'll be back on his feet in 2 days. But maybe next time. He won't lead with a flourish when an enemy is trying to gut him." Illyria matched his pace, her footsteps silent compared to the heavy thud of his combat boots. The council is furious. They say you are corrupting the royal guard. They say you are teaching them to fight like humans? Jacob finished for her. Good. Because fighting like Zetherian is going to get them extinct. He stopped and turned to face her. They were alone in the corridor. Why are you here? Illyria? Did you come to scold me? Tell me to play nice with the boys in the fancy armor? I came to thank you, she said, her voice tight. Jacob raised an eyebrow. Thank you. I just humiliated one of your cousin's best friends. You showed them the truth, Illyria said. She stepped closer, the scent of her, something like ozone and night-blooming jasmine, filling the small space between them. They are arrogant. They think war is a ceremony. I saw the fear in Valen's eyes. He realized he was mortal. They need that fear. She looked up at him, her violet eyes searching his face. But you enjoy it too much. Jacob, you like the breaking? Jacob laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. He leaned against the stone wall, crossing his arms. Don't psychoanalyze me, princess. You hired a weapon. Don't be surprised when it cuts. You are not a weapon, she said softly. You are a man. I was a man a long time ago, Jacob said. Now I'm just a collection of bad habits and reflex actions. You keep your distance, Highness. You play your politics. Sit on your throne and look pretty. Let me handle the blood. Illyria's expression hardened. The mask of the diplomat cracked. Look pretty? She repeated, her voice dropping to a whisper that vibrated with danger. You think I am some fragile ornament? I risked treason to bring you here. I defied the elders. I am holding this empire together with nothing but willpower and lies, and you dare to speak to me as if I am a child playing dress-up. She stepped right into his personal space, looking up at him with a ferocity that startled him. I am not a statue. Jacob Rain. Jacob looked down at her. She was trembling with rage. The bioluminescence in her skin was flaring brighter, pulsing with her heartbeat. She looked magnificent and dangerous. Prove it, he challenged softly. Illyria snapped. She grabbed the lapels of his tactical vest and yanked him down. It was an impulsive, violent motion. She crushed her mouth against his. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It tasted of copper and electricity. Jacob froze for a split second, his brain misfiring at the sudden contact. And then instinct took over. He didn't push her away. He brought his hands up, tangling them in the complex weave of her hair, gripping the back of her neck to hold her there. She made a sound low in her throat, a mix of frustration and hunger. Her lips were cooler than a human's, but the heat radiating from her skin was intense. For a moment, the corridor, the politics, the looming war, it all vanished. There was just the friction of two different species trying to consume each other. Then, reality crashed back in. They broke apart, breathing hard. Illyria stumbled back a step, her hand flying to her mouth. Her eyes were wide, the pupils dilated to encompass the entire iris. Jacob leaned back against the wall, his chest heaving. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Well, he said, his voice rougher than before. That's one way to win an argument. Illyria stared at him, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She looked like she wanted to slap him or kiss him again or run away. She started, but the words failed her. She straightened her spine, pulling the mask of royalty back into place, though her hands were still shaking. We have a feast to attend, Commander, she said. Her voice clipped and formal, though her eyes betrayed her. Try to look presentable. She turned and swept down the corridor, her robes billowing behind her. Jacob watched her go. He touched his lips, They still tingled with the static charge of her skin. "You are in so much trouble." "Rain," he muttered to himself. The solstice feast was a sensory overload. The great hall of the palace was a cavern of white marble and gold, filled with 300 of the most powerful beings in the Zitharian Empire. Anti-grav platters floated between guests, laden with exotic fruits and meats. Musicians played instruments that manipulated sound waves to induce euphoria. Jacob stood near a pillar, nursing a glass of nectar that was too sweet for his palate. He was wearing a formal Zitharian tunic, black military cut with silver braiding, that Illyria had insisted he wear. It felt like a straitjacket. He scanned the room. Habits died hard. He wasn't looking at the jewelry or the smiles, he was looking at sightlines, exits, and hands. The council sat at the high table. Illyria was there, seated to the right of the empty emperor's chair. She looked radiant, but Jacob could see the tension in her jaw. General Varric sat 2 seats down, laughing loudly at a joke, but his eyes were cold. Jacob took a sip of his drink. Something was wrong. The air felt too static. The musicians were playing a crescendo, the tempo increasing. He saw a server moving toward the high table. The movement was wrong, too fluid, too purposeful. The server's hand drifted not to the wine pitcher, but to the waistband of their sash. Jacob didn't think. He moved. "Drop!" he roared, his voice shattering the polite conversation of the hall. He vaulted over a banquet table, scattering plates of food. The server spun around, and the illusion field flickered and died, revealing an assassin clad in sleek, light-bending armor. A vibro dagger, humming with lethal frequency, materialized in the assassin's hand. 2 more servers dropped their disguises near the entrance. Illyria froze in her chair. The assassin lunged for her throat. Jacob was faster. He tackled the assassin mid-air, driving his shoulder into the attacker's midsection. They crashed onto the high table, smashing crystal goblets and overturning the centerpiece. The assassin was strong, enhanced with cybernetics. A metal hand clawed at Jacob's face. Jacob tucked his chin, ignoring the tearing of his skin, and drove his knee into the assassin's groin. The attacker didn't even flinch. Pain suppressors, Jacob realized. He grabbed a silver carving knife from the table, a ceremonial heavy blade. With a savage grunt, he drove it down into the assassin's neck, finding the gap in the armor plating. Dark. Viscous blood sprayed over the white tablecloth and onto Jacob's face. The assassin went limp. "Get down!" Jacob yelled at Illyria, shoving her under the heavy stone table. The other 2 assassins opened fire with concealed pulse pistols. Energy bolts scorched the air, shattering the marble pillar where Jacob had been standing moments before. Chaos erupted. Nobles screamed and trampled each other, trying to flee. Jacob rolled off the table, grabbing the assassin's fallen pulse pistol. He came up in a crouch, leveling the weapon. 1 shot took the second assassin in the knee, dropping him. The second shot took him in the head. The third assassin turned to run, blending into the crowd. Jacob tracked the movement, the slight shimmer in the air. He fired. The bolt took the runner in the spine. Silence fell over the hall, broken only by the sobbing of a duchess and the sizzle of melted stone. Jacob stood up, panting. He was covered in alien blood and food. He held a weapon in the sacred hall. General Varric stood up slowly, his face pale. He pointed a trembling finger at Jacob. "He has shed blood in the sanctuary," Varric screamed. "He has drawn a weapon in the presence of the throne. Sacrilege." Royal guards flooded the room. Surrounding Jacob, dozens of energy pikes were leveled at his chest. Jacob didn't drop the gun. He looked at Illyria, who was crawling out from under the table, her robes stained with wine and blood. She was alive. "Drop the weapon! Human!" a guard captain shouted. or we fire." Jacob looked at the guards, then at Illyria. He engaged the safety and tossed the gun to the floor. It clattered loudly in the silence. "You're welcome," he said to the room at large. "Seize him," Varix commanded. The prison block was deep underground, carved into the bedrock of the planet. Jacob's cell was a cube of transparent force fields. There was no bed, just a gravity shelf for sleeping. He had been there for 6 hours. He paced the small space, testing the perimeter. The field hummed, stinging his skin if he got too close. The containment field shimmered and became translucent on one side. General Varix stood there, flanked by 2 heavy combat drones. "Comfortable?" "Commander?" Varix asked, his voice dripping with faux concern. "I've been in worse," Jacob said, leaning against the back wall. "Centauri Prime prisons didn't have climate control. This is practically a vacation. You are a problem." "Rain," Varix said, clasping his hands behind his back. "A chaotic element. You saved the princess, yes, but you violated the sacred laws of hospitality and combat. The penalty is death." Jacob laughed dryly. "Convenient. I save the air, and you get to execute me for bad manners. Almost makes me think you planned it." Varix's smile didn't reach his eyes. The assassins were unexpected. Rogue elements of a separatists faction. But your presence exacerbates the instability. He stepped closer to the field. "I am a pragmatist, Commander. I do not wish for a public execution. It would upset my cousin. So, I offer you a choice. A shuttle is prepped in Hangar Bay 4. The security grid will suffer a momentary glitch in 10 minutes. You leave. You never return. You disappear back to your hole on Othris 4. "And if I stay?" Jacob asked. "Then you will be tried by the ecclesiarchy. And they do not execute with clean shots. They flay the mind, layer by layer." Jacob walked up to the field, standing inches from Varix's face, separated only by the humming energy. "You're scared," Jacob whispered. "You're terrified that I'm going to turn these palace peacocks into soldiers. You're scared that Illyria is listening to me instead of you." 10 minutes. "Rain," Varix said, turning away. "Take the ship, or take the pain." The tribunal was held the next morning. Jacob stood in the center of the council chamber, bound in energy shackles. The 7 elders looked down at him with disdain. High Counselor Zaylor read from a scroll. "For the crime of desecration, for the bringing of weapons into the sanctuary, and for the shedding of blood upon the white stone, the accused is sentenced to enough." The doors to the chamber burst open. Illyria strode in. She was not wearing the soft silks of the feast. She was wearing the ceremonial armor of a war queen, white plating edged in gold, a high collar, and a crimson cape flowing behind her. She marched to the center of the room, standing between Jacob and the council. "Princess," Zaylor sputtered, "this is a closed tribunal. You have no standing here until I am the blood of the throne." Illyria shouted, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "And I am the only reason any of you are drawing breath today." She turned to the council, her eyes blazing. "You sit here and debate laws and rituals while assassins walk into our home. You judge the man who saved me while you hid under your tables." She pointed at Jacob. "Look at him. You call him a beast. You call him a savage. But while you were trembling, he was killing. While you were praying, he was acting." She walked over to Jacob. The guard stepped back, unsure. She reached out and placed her hand on the control node of his shackles. "Princess, you cannot!" Varix shouted from the side. Illyria ignored him. She keyed in her royal override code. The shackles deactivated and fell to the floor with a heavy clang. You may not like him, Illyria said, her voice quiet now, deadly calm. You may hate what he is, but you are alive because of him, and I will not let you kill the only shield we have left. She turned to Jacob. Commander Rain is hereby exonerated by royal decree. He is appointed High Protector of the realm. Any move against him is a move against the crown. She scanned the room, daring anyone to speak. No one did. Come, Commander, she said. We have work to do. Jacob rubbed his wrists. He looked at Varix, who was staring at the floor, jaw clenched. After you, Your Highness, Jacob said. Night had fallen over the capital. The moons were high, casting a silver glow over the palace balconies. Jacob was in his quarters, a suite far too large for one man, cleaning his pistol. The mechanical click-clack of the weapon assembly was the only sound in the room. The door chime did not ring. The door simply slid open. Jacob spun around, half raising the slide of the pistol before he saw her. Illyria stood in the doorway. She had shed the armor. She was barefoot. She wore a loose robe of midnight blue silk that hung open slightly at the collar. Her hair was down, cascading over her shoulders in a curtain of violet and black. She looked small without the armor, and terrifyingly beautiful. She keyed the door lock behind her. Princess, Jacob said, lowering the gun parts to the table. You shouldn't be here. If the council sees you, I am done caring what the council sees, she said. She walked into the room. She moved silently, her bare feet making no sound on the cool floor. She stopped a few feet from him. You could have left, she said. Varix told me he offered you a ship. You could be halfway to the outer rim by now. Why did you stay? Jacob looked at her. He thought about the mining colony, the dust, the silence. I don't run from a fight, he said. And I didn't want to leave you alone with the sharks. Illyria closed the distance. She reached out and took the gun barrel from his hand, setting it on the table. Then she took his hand. Her skin was hot, feverish. You saved my life twice in 2 days. Jacob Rain. Just doing the job, he muttered, his throat suddenly dry. No, she whispered. It is more than that. She guided his hand to her waist, pressing his palm against the silk of her robe. Through the thin fabric, he could feel the heat of her body, the alien rhythm of her heart beating faster than a human's. Thank me, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Thank me like a soldier, not like a subject, not like a diplomat. Jacob looked into her eyes. He saw the fear there, not of him, but of the vulnerability. She was offering him everything. He was a man of war. He knew how to destroy. He wasn't sure he knew how to hold something this precious without breaking it. Illyria, he warned low. She silenced him by stepping in and kissing him. This time, it wasn't angry. It was desperate. It was a plea. Jacob made a low sound in his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, lifting her effortlessly. She wrapped her legs around his waist, burying her face in the crook of his neck. He carried her to the bed. What followed was a collision of worlds. It was a slow-burning discovery. They were different. Anatomy, temperature, texture. Her skin reacted to his touch, ripples of bioluminescence flaring gold and violet wherever his fingers grazed. To Jacob, she felt like living energy, vibrant and overwhelming. To Illyria, he was solid, heavy, an anchor of rough skin and scar tissue that grounded her floating existence. There was a clumsiness to it, a frantic learning curve. She gasped when his stubble grazed her sensitive throat. He flinched when her nails, sharper than a human's, dug into his back. But the clumsiness made it real. It wasn't a royal ceremony. It was raw. It was fierce. It was the first time in 6 years Jacob had felt warmth that didn't come from a weapon. Hours later, the room was dim. They lay tangled in the sheets. Illyria was resting her head on his chest, tracing the line of an old shrapnel scar over his heart. Her skin had dimmed to a soft, pulsating blue. Jacob stared at the ceiling. He felt exposed, vulnerable in a way combat never made him feel. "What are you afraid of?" he asked, his voice rumbling in his chest. Illyria stopped tracing the scar. She was silent for a long time. "I'm not afraid of the Exarch," she whispered. "I can fight monsters. I can fly fleets." She propped herself up on her elbow, looking down at him. Her hair fell around them like a curtain. "I think the real war isn't out there," she said, gesturing to the balcony and the stars beyond. "It's in this palace. It's in the blood. I look at my council, at my own cousin, and I see strangers. I see hunger." She shivered, and Jacob pulled the sheet up over her shoulder. "We'll find them," Jacob promised. "If there is rot in the walls, we'll burn it out." Illyria leaned down and kissed his forehead, a soft, chaste benediction. "Just don't leave me," she whispered. "Never," he said. A soft chime from Jacob's heavy-duty field comm unit broke the silence. It was sitting on the pile of his discarded clothes. Jacob frowned. That frequency was encrypted, strictly for the investigation. He sat up, swinging his legs off the bed. He picked up the device. "What is it?" Illyria asked, sitting up, holding the sheet to her chest. Jacob activated the screen. The blue light illuminated his face, casting deep shadows in his eye sockets. "It's a ping from the reliquary," he said, his voice turning cold. "The AI has been running background algorithms on the palace data stream." He tapped the screen, expanding the file. "It found a transmission," he said. "A subspace burst sent 3 minutes before the assassins struck the feast. It bypassed the royal firewalls using a genetic key." "Whose key?" Illyria asked, dread pooling in her stomach. Jacob turned the screen toward her. The authorization code belonged to High Counselor Zalor, and the destination coordinates weren't to a separatist cell. They were in deep space, to the Exarch void. Illyria stared at the screen. The betrayal wasn't just suspected anymore. It was proven. "They are already here," she whispered. Jacob stood up, reaching for his pants. The soldier was back. The lover was packed away. "Get dressed, princess," he said grimly. The war just started. The alarm did not sound like a siren. In the Zetherian High Command, a crisis was signaled by the cessation of the ambient harmonic hum that usually filled the air. The silence was sudden, absolute, and terrifying. Princess Illyria stood before the great tactical map in the war room, her hands gripping the obsidian railing until her knuckles turned white. The holographic display, usually a calm swirl of blue and violet star systems, was bleeding red. It was Sanctum, a neutral moon on the border of the rim. It was a sanctuary world, home to monks and pacifists. Now, it was a slaughterhouse. "Report!" General Varix barked, though his voice lacked its usual polished arrogance. "We have lost contact with the orbital garrison," a comms officer replied, his voice trembling. "The Third Fleet engaged the hostiles 7 minutes ago. They are gone." "Gone." High Counselor Zalor stepped forward, his heavy robes rustling. "A fleet does not simply vanish." "They were consumed," Jacob Rain said. He was standing in the shadows at the back of the room, arms crossed, watching the feed. He walked into the light, and the counselors parted around him like water breaking against a rock. He pointed at the jagged, erratic energy signatures on the map. "Look at the dispersal patterns. Your ships didn't detonate. They were boarded, stripped, and integrated. This isn't a skirmish. It is a feeding frenzy. Jacob turned to Illyria. They are establishing a beachhead. If they take Sanctum, they have a jump point straight to your inner systems that we have to hit them now, on the ground, before they dig in. Impossible, Zaylor sneered. We must fortify the core worlds. We cannot waste resources on a neutral moon. Illyria looked at the map. She saw the red tide expanding. She thought of the monks on Sanctum. She thought of the silence in the room. Commander Rain is right, she said, her voice ringing clear in the silence. If we wait, we die. She turned to the comms officer. Authorize the strike, mobilize the Crimson Guard, and prepare my personal shuttle. You cannot mean to go, Varric said, stepping in her path. It is suicide. You are the heir. I am a Zetharian, she replied, her eyes cold fire. And I will not hide behind walls while my galaxy burns. Commander Rain will lead the assault, and I will go with him. The dropship rattled violently as it punched through the atmosphere of Sanctum. The air inside smelled of recycled oxygen and fear. 20 elite Crimson Guards sat strapped into their crash couches, their golden armor gleaming in the dim red emergency lights. They looked like statues of gods, perfect and terrified. Jacob sat opposite Illyria. He was checking the charge on his pulse rifle for the 10th time. He looked calm, but Illyria could feel the tension radiating from him through the phantom echo of their stasis link. Stay behind me, Jacob said, his voice low enough that only she could hear over the roar of the engines. I know, she said. No, you don't, he countered sharply. You have seen duels, Illyria. You have seen sports. You haven't seen this. The Exarch doesn't fight, they harvest. If you see one, you aim for the central processor in the chest. If that doesn't work, you run. Do you understand? I understand, she lied. The pilot's voice crackled over the comms. Landing zone in 10 seconds and it's hot down there. The ramp hissed open before the skids even touched the gray dust of the moon. Go, 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 Jacob roared. They surged out into a nightmare. Sanctum had been a world of white stone temples and gardens. Now, it was a landscape of ash and twisted metal. The sky was choked with black smoke. In the distance, the great monastery burned, painting the horizon in apocalyptic orange. And everywhere, there was the Exarch. They were monstrosities of chrome and flesh, scavenged from a dozen species and welded together by machine logic. Some moved on spider legs of razor-sharp steel. Others hovered on anti-grav sleds, their torsos grafted with heavy plasma cannons. The Zetharian Guard opened fire. Their energy pikes and refined lasers struck the Exarch ranks, burning holes in the metal carapaces. But the machines did not scream. They did not pause. They simply advanced, returning fire with chaotic, overwhelming force. Jacob moved like a blur. He didn't stand in formation. He utilized cover, sliding behind a fallen statue, popping up to put a single high-impact round through the ocular sensor of a charging brute, then moving again before the return fire could track him. Illyria stayed close to him, her own ceremonial pulse pistol gripped in both hands. The noise was deafening, the screech of metal, the boom of explosions, the wet tear of flesh. She saw a guardsman, a boy she had known since childhood, lifted into the air by a massive Exarch construct. The machine tore him in half with the casual indifference of a child breaking a toy. Illyria screamed, firing wildly. Her shots pinged harmlessly off the construct's armor. Focus! Jacob grabbed her shoulder, spinning her around. And don't look at the dead. Look at the targets. They pushed forward, fighting street by street toward the monastery. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and copper. Illyria's pristine white combat robes were stained with soot and the violet spray of Zetharian blood. They breached the monastery gates. The courtyard was a slaughterhouse. But in the center, something was happening. A massive Exarch commander, a towering centaur-like machine with a human skull encased in glass on its chest, was overseeing the installation of a device. It was a pulsing organic pillar that seemed to be rooting itself into the stone floor. "Target the commander!" Jacob shouted. He broke cover, drawing fire. He wanted them to look at him. It worked. The Exarch drones turned their weapons on the human who was sprinting across the open ground, firing dual pistols with impossible accuracy. Illyria saw her opening. She ran. She didn't run away. She ran toward the flank, scrambling up a pile of rubble. The commander was distracted by Jacob. She raised her pistol. Her hands were shaking. She steadied them, remembering the breathing exercises of the court, the focus of the meditations. Just a target, she told herself, just a silhouette. She fired. The bolt struck the commander in the glass casing of its chest. The glass shattered. The human skull inside exploded. The massive machine convulsed, its legs buckling. It crashed to the ground with a sound like a collapsing building. The drones, cut off from their tactical node, faltered. The surviving guardsmen rallied, cutting them down in a hail of crossfire. Silence fell over the courtyard, heavy and sudden. Jacob walked over to the fallen commander. He kicked the metal carcass to ensure it was offline. Then he turned to Illyria. She was standing on the rubble, her chest heaving, her face smeared with ash. She looked horrified. She looked magnificent. "You okay?" he asked, holstering his weapons. Illyria looked at her hands. She was killed. It wasn't clean. It wasn't noble. It was just death. "I am fine," she said, her voice brittle. Jacob walked past her to the pulsing pillar in the center of the courtyard. He knelt down, examining where the metallic roots were digging into the stone. The stone wasn't just cracking, it was changing. The rock was turning into gray, veiny flesh. He touched the transmutation with a gloved finger, then pulled back, disgusted. "This isn't an invasion," he said grimly. Illyria climbed down and stood beside him. "What do you mean?" "Invasions are about territory," Jacob said, looking at the way the biomechanical corruption was spreading up the walls of the temple, eating the ancient carvings. "They aren't here to live on this moon. They are here to turn it into a battery, a breeding ground." He looked at her, his eyes dark. "It's a planting, Illyria. They are terraforming the galaxy into a graveyard." The return to Zetherian Prime was not a victory parade. It was a medical evacuation. The surviving Crimson Guard were loaded onto stretchers. Illyria refused treatment, though she had a deep gash on her arm from a piece of shrapnel. She sat in the back of the shuttle, staring at nothing, until Jacob sat beside her and wordlessly handed her a canteen of water. They landed at the private royal hangar at dusk. The sky was a bruised purple. General Varix was there to meet them, flanked by a fresh squad of guards. He looked at the battered strike team with a mixture of distaste and calculation. "You survived," Varix said, looking at Jacob. "Disappointed?" Jacob asked, limping slightly. He had taken a plasma burn to his thigh. "I am relieved, of course," Varix said smoothly. "The council is eager for a report." "It can wait," Illyria said, stepping off the ramp. "We need medical attention and rest." She began to walk toward the transport speeder waiting to take them to the palace proper. Jacob fell in step beside her. "Something feels off," Jacob murmured. "You are paranoid," Illyria said, though she didn't pull away when his shoulder brushed hers. "I'm alive," Jacob corrected. They reached the speeder. A royal valet opened the door. Illyria moved to get in. Jacob stopped. He grabbed her arm, hard. "Wait," he said. He looked at the speeder. It was a standard Mark IV transport, but there was a hum, a low-frequency vibration that he felt in his teeth. It was the same hum he had heard on the mining moon. Down! He didn't wait for her to ask why. He threw himself at her, wrapping his arms around her waist and tackling her away from the vehicle. They hit the hangar floor hard, sliding across the polished metal. The speeder detonated. It was a shaped charge, designed to incinerate the passenger compartment. The blast wave picked them up and threw them another 20 feet. Jacob took the brunt of it. He had positioned his body as a shield over hers. He felt the heat sear the back of his combat vest, felt the shrapnel tear into his legs and back. The world turned white, then black. The Royal Medbay was a place of soft lights and efficient silence. Jacob drifted in and out of consciousness. He felt the cold gel of the Bacta patches on his burns. He heard the rhythmic beeping of the biomonitors. He opened his eyes. His vision was blurry. He saw Violet. Illyria was sitting by the bed. She was still wearing her ruined combat robes, the white fabric stained with blood and soot. She was holding his hand, pressing it against her cheek. She was crying. It was a silent, racking grief that shook her entire body. The tears of a Zetherian were silver, shimmering like mercury as they tracked down her face. "Hey," Jacob croaked. His throat felt like he had swallowed broken glass. Illyria's head snapped up. Her eyes were wide, red-rimmed. "You are awake," she whispered. She stood up, leaning over him, her hands hovering over his bandaged chest as if she wanted to touch him but was afraid to cause pain. "You idiot," she sobbed, a laugh breaking through the tears. "You absolute idiot. You threw yourself on a bomb." "Habit," Jacob rasped. He tried to sit up, but the pain slammed him back down. "Don't move," she commanded, her voice trembling. "The healers say your back is—" "It is bad, Jacob. But the regeneration field is working." She sat on the edge of the bed. The distance between royal and commoner, between alien and human, had vanished in the fire. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you do it?" "You know why," he said. Illyria looked at him. She looked at the burns on his neck, the scars on his face, the sheer, stubborn durability of him. "I thought you were dead," she whispered. When the smoke cleared, "You weren't moving. I have never felt cold like that, not even in space." She leaned down, her face inches from his. "I hate this crown," she said fiercely. "I hate politics. I hate the lies. I would give it up. Jacob, I would walk away from the throne today if you asked me to." "Don't talk like that," Jacob said, reaching up to brush a silver tear from her cheek. His thumb was rough against her skin. "The galaxy needs a queen." "I don't need a galaxy," she said. "I need you." She kissed him. It wasn't like the first time in the hallway, angry and impulsive. And it wasn't like the night in his quarters, exploratory and new. This was desperate. It was a claiming. She climbed onto the narrow medical bed, straddling his legs, careful of his injuries but unable to be apart from him, her hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer. Jacob hissed in pain as he shifted, but he didn't stop her. He needed the contact as much as she did. He needed to feel the pulse of her life against him to drive away the shadow of the explosion. Their lovemaking was slow, hampered by his injuries. But the intensity was terrifying. It was a conversation of survival. Every touch was a confirmation. "I am here. You are here. We are not dead." Illyria wept through most of it, her tears falling onto his chest, mixing with the sweat and the sterile smell of the medical gel. When she finally collapsed against him, her head on his shoulder, the room was silent again, save for the steady, reassuring beep of the heart monitor. Jacob stroked her hair. He stared at the sterile white ceiling. "Who planted it?" he asked quietly. Illyria stiffened against him. She didn't want to talk about the war. She wanted to stay in this bubble of warmth. But she knew he was right. Varix, she said, the name tasting like poison. It had to be. He controlled the hangar security. He met us at the pad. He missed twice, Jacob said. He won't miss a third time. The doors to the private medical suite hissed open. Illyria sat up, pulling the sheet over her bare shoulders. Jacob reached for the pistol that wasn't there. General Varix walked in. He was not alone. 10 royal guards, weapons drawn, filled the room. General, Illyria said, her voice ice cold. Get out. I am afraid I cannot do that. Highness, Varix said. He looked at Jacob, lying in the bed, and a sneer of triumph curled his lip. Commander Jacob Rain, you are under arrest for high treason and attempted regicide. Illyria laughed, a sharp, incredulous sound. Regicide? He took a bomb from me, you fool. A bomb he planted, Varix said smoothly. He held up a data pad. Forensics found traces of Terran-grade explosive residue in his quarters. And we found encrypted comms logs on his ship communicating with the Exarch frequency. That is a lie, Illyria shouted, standing up on the bed, the sheet clutching to her form like a toga. You fabricated it. It is evidence, Varix corrected. The council has already reviewed it. They have ordered his immediate execution. He is a sleeper agent. Illyria, he seduced you to get close to the throne. Guards, seize him. Jacob looked at the guards. He was injured, unarmed, and naked. He calculated the odds. 0. He looked at Illyria. Her eyes were darting around the room, looking for a weapon, an exit, anything. Illyria, Jacob said calmly. She looked down at him. Do you trust me? He asked. With my life, she said. Then run, he said. Jacob grabbed the heavy medical monitor beside the bed and hurled it, not at the guards, but at the main power junction on the wall. Sparks showered the room. The lights died. The electronic door locks disengaged with a groan. Jacob rolled off the bed, hitting the floor with a grunt of pain. He swept Illyria's legs, knocking her down beside him as the guards opened fire blindly into the dark. Energy bolts sizzled through the air where she had been standing a second before. The ventilation grate, Jacob hissed, dragging her toward the floor-level intake vent in the corner. It's too small, she whispered. Not for us. He kicked the grate in. He shoved her through, then squeezed his own battered body after her. He could hear Varix screaming orders in the dark. Seal the building. Lock down the quadrant. They crawled through the ducts, the metal cold against their skin. Jacob was bleeding again, his bandages soaked through, but he kept moving. He let her down, always down. Where are we going? Illyria gasped, crawling behind him. The only place they won't look. Jacob grunted. The basement. They emerged an hour later in the sub-level archives. It was a tomb of information. Miles of dusty server banks and physical data tapes that hadn't been accessed in centuries. Jacob collapsed against a rack of data spools, sliding to the floor. He was pale, his breathing shallow. Illyria found a maintenance locker and managed to scrounge up 2 technician jumpsuits. They were gray and shapeless, but they offered warmth and dignity. She helped Jacob dress, hissing in sympathy every time he winced. We can't stay here, she said, zipping up her suit. They will scan the palace. They won't scan this deep, Jacob said. The radiation from the geothermal core masks biosigns down here. That's why I chose it. He limped over to an ancient console. It was dusty, the interface archaic. This is the old core, Jacob said. Before your people switched to bio-neural networks, you used hard-light computing. Varix can't scrub this on its read-only memory. What are you looking for? Illyria asked. Varix said I had comms with the Exarch, Jacob muttered, his fingers flying over the unfamiliar keys. But to fake that, he needed the frequency codes, real ones. The screen flickered to life, casting a green glow over their faces. Jacob ran a search algorithm, bypassing the modern security protocols by using a back door he had noticed in the reliquary's code. He pulled up the security logs for the royal hangar from 10 years ago. "Got you," he whispered. He played a video file. The timestamp was from a decade ago, long before the current crisis. The image was grainy. It showed a younger General Varric standing in a cargo bay. He was speaking to a hooded figure. The figure lowered its hood, revealing a face that was half flesh, half circuitry, an Exarch emissary. On the screen, the emissary extended a metallic tendril. It touched Varric's forehead. Varric didn't pull away. He shuddered, his eyes rolling back as the nanites flowed from the machine into his skin. Illyria gasped, covering her mouth. "He wasn't recruited," Jacob said, his voice hollow. "He was infected." He tapped another key. The file showed Varric undergoing medical scans weeks later. The doctors found nothing. The tech had integrated perfectly into his nervous system. "He is a sleeper," Jacob said. "He has been one for 10 years, waiting for the signal to open the gates." Illyria stared at the screen, at the face of her cousin, the man she had grown up with. "He isn't just a traitor," she whispered. "He is the invasion." She looked at Jacob. "We have to tell the council." "They won't listen," Jacob said. "Varric controls the narrative. If we go up there, we die." "Then what do we do?" she asked. "We are two people in a basement against an empire." Jacob looked at the archives around them. He looked at the endless rows of forgotten history. "We run," he said. "We go to the one place Varric can't follow, the Exarch void." "That's madness," Illyria said. "It's the only way," Jacob replied. "We need proof. We need the source code of the infection, and to get that, we have to go to the source." He took her hand. "You asked if I would fight, Princess." The fight just went mobile. Illyria squeezed his hand. She looked at the gray jumpsuit she was wearing, so far removed from her royal silks. "Call me Illyria," she said. "The princess died in the explosion." Jacob managed a weak, crooked smile. "All right. Illyria, let's go steal a ship." The shadow of the asteroid belt known as the Sunder offered the only sanctuary in a galaxy that had suddenly turned its eyes against them. It was a graveyard of rocks, ice, and the skeletal remains of mining vessels from centuries past. A labyrinth of twisting tunnels and drifting debris where sensors went blind and ships went to die. Jacob Rain and Princess Illyria were not dead, though the Zetherian Empire claimed otherwise. They traveled in a stolen heavy hauler, a rust bucket named the Scavenger's Prayer. It was ugly, slow, and smelled of hydraulic fluid, but its transponder was dead, and its hull was thick enough to mask their thermal signatures. For 3 weeks, they had run. They docked at Shadowport 7, a hollowed-out asteroid that served as a black market bazaar for the desperate and the damned. The air in the docking bay was hazy with illicit smoke and the neon glow of holographic advertisements selling everything from organ replacements to clean identities. Illyria pulled the hood of her grease-stained jumpsuit lower. Her face, once plastered on every hollow screen in the core worlds as the jewel of the Empire, was now plastered on the bounty boards as a traitor. The image cycled above the heads of the crowd, wanted the fallen princess, dead or alive. Reward, 50 million credits. Beside her. Jacob limped slightly, his hand hovering near the concealed blaster at his hip. He looked less like a commander and more like the jagged rocks surrounding them, rough, worn, and dangerous. "Keep your head down," Jacob murmured. And don't look anyone in the eye. Eye contact is a challenge down here. I know how to walk among wolves. Jacob, Illyria whispered back, though her heart hammered against her ribs. They weren't alone. They were meeting a contact Jacob knew from the old wars, a fence named Silas who ran a salvage crew. Silas was a cyborg, more metal than man, with an optical drive where his left eye should have been. Silas met them in the back of a noodle shop that smelled of burnt garlic. He didn't look surprised to see them. He just looked tired. You look like hell. Rain. Silas grunted, sliding a bowl of steaming gray protein slop toward them. And you brought the most expensive fugitive in the galaxy to my dinner table. I should shoot you both and retire to a pleasure moon. You could, Jacob said, not looking up from the bowl. But then who would fix your sublight drives? I heard the oscillation in your engine deck when we docked. Your stabilizer coupling is cracked. You'll be a dead space junk in 2 jumps. Silas laughed, a sound like grinding gears. Still got the ear, I see. Silas introduced them to his onboard AI, a pre-war construct of Terran origin named Darwin. The AI's avatar was a flickering projection of an old Earth elderly man in a tweed jacket, sitting on the console of Silas's ship. Darwin looked at Illyria with digital amusement. So this is the one, Darwin's voice crackled through the speakers. The princess of misplaced hearts. You have traded a palace of gold for a tin can flying through a shooting gallery. Evolution is usually an upward trajectory, my dear. This seems like a slide. It is a strategic retreat, Illyria said, her voice steady. It is a romantic suicide pact, Darwin corrected dryly. But I suppose the two often look the same to biologicals. They spent the next few cycles working with Silas's crew, earning their keep and repairs for the scavenger's prayer. Illyria, who had never lifted anything heavier than a ceremonial goblet, learned to weld hull plates and calibrate ion coils. She learned that grease didn't wash out of skin easily and that exhaustion was a better sedative than any royal physician's draft. One night, during a sleep cycle, they sat in the cargo hold of their stolen ship. The life support hummed a low, rhythmic thrum. They had a small heat lamp set up, casting a warm, artificial campfire glow over the crates of stolen rations. Jacob was stripping his pistol, his movements precise and mechanical. Illyria sat opposite him, knees pulled to her chest, watching the stars streak by the small viewport. My mother died in a room like this, Illyria said suddenly. Jacob paused, holding the recoil spring. You said she took her own life. She did, Illyria whispered. But she didn't use a weapon. She just stopped. The war with the separatists had been dragging on for 10 years. My father became hard, distant. He stopped touching her. He stopped looking at her. She was a creature of light, Jacob. She needed connection, the coldness of the court, the constant death reports. It starved her. She turned to look at him, her violet eyes shimmering in the dim light. She stopped eating. Then she stopped speaking. One morning, I went to her chambers and she was just gone. Her heart simply ceased to beat. The royal healers said it was a genetic failure. But I knew. The war stole her joy until there was nothing left to fuel the machine. She looked at her hands, calloused now from the welding torch. That is why I fear the silence, Jacob. That is why I broke the law to find you. I did not want to fade away. Jacob set the gun down. The silence stretched between them, heavy and thick. I killed her, Jacob said. Illyria frowned. Who? Her name was Sarah, Jacob said. His voice was flat, detached, the voice of a man reading his own autopsy report. We were stationed on Colony 4. She was a medic, brilliant, funny. She had a laugh that could make you forget you were standing in mud and blood. He picked up a rag and wiped invisible oil from his hands. The Exarch deployed a localized mind control pulse. It was early tech, crude. It didn't work on everyone, but my neural pathways were receptive. I don't remember it happening, and I just remember waking up. He looked up at Illyria. The pain in his eyes was a physical thing, a black hole of guilt. My hands were around her throat. She was already dead. I was the weapon. Illyria. I killed the only thing I loved because a machine told my brain it was necessary. Illyria didn't recoil. She didn't gasp. She moved across the space between them. "That is why you don't let people in," she said softly. "You are afraid you will break them." "I am a risk," Jacob said hoarsely. "You should be running from me, not with me." Illyria took his face in her hands. She leaned her forehead against his. "We are all broken, Jacob. That is how the light gets in." The peace did not last. 2 days later, a bounty hunter patrol, 3 interceptors with unauthorized markings, found them in the ice ring of Oris. The chase was frantic. Jacob flew the scavenger's prayer like a madman, skimming the surface of massive ice asteroids, using the debris fields to confuse the enemy sensors. "Hold on!" Jacob roared as the ship shuddered under a glancing plasma hit. The hull groaned. The warning klaxons screamed. "Hull breach in the aft corridor!" Darwin's voice shouted over the comms. "Seal failed. Atmospheric venting is imminent." Illyria was in the aft corridor, securing the cargo straps. "Illyria!" Jacob shouted, locking the controls and unbuckling. He scrambled back. The corridor was a wind tunnel. The air was being sucked out into the vacuum, pulling everything loose with it. Crates, tools, and debris flew toward the jagged tear in the metal. Illyria was clinging to a support strut, her body horizontal as the gale-force wind tried to rip her away. Jacob grabbed a tether and clipped it to his belt. He launched himself down the corridor, and then he grabbed her hand just as her grip failed. The jolt nearly dislocated his shoulder. They swung there, suspended in the howling, chaotic wind, the black void visible through the tear in the hull. Then, the gravity plating failed. They were weightless. The suction grew stronger. Jacob's tether held, but the metal bracket on the wall was groaning, bending under the strain. "Climb!" Jacob yelled over the roar of escaping air. "Climb up!" Illyria didn't climb. She saw the bracket giving way. If they both stayed, the tether would snap, and they would both be spaced. She looked at the emergency seal button on the far wall. It was 10 feet away. Impossible to reach against the suction, unless she let go. She looked at Jacob. "No!" Jacob screamed, reading her intent. "Don't you dare! I'm not fading!" "Jacob!" she yelled. "I'm fighting!" She didn't let go. She kicked off the wall, using the last leverage she had. She didn't pull away from him. She swung toward him, using his body as a fulcrum to launch herself across the corridor. It was a desperate gymnastic maneuver. She flew through the vacuum, her hand slapping the emergency seal panel. The blast doors slammed shut instantly. The wind died. The silence returned. They floated in the zero gravity of the sealed corridor, drifting in the dark. Jacob pulled himself along the wall until he reached her. She was breathing hard, shaking. He grabbed her, pulling her into him. They spun slowly in the air. No up, no down, just each other. "You crazy, royal, suicidal." Jacob muttered into her hair, his heart pounding like a drum. "Shut up, soldier," she whispered. The adrenaline of the near-death experience shifted, curdling into something else. The need to affirm life. They didn't speak, in the darkened hull, illuminated only by the emergency strobe lights. They stripped off the heavy flight suits. Making love in zero gravity was not like the desperate, pain-filled encounter in the med bay. This was fluid. It was a dance. They floated together, limbs entangled, moving with a slow, dreamlike grace. Without the constraints of gravity, every touch sent them drifting, spinning slowly like a binary star system. Illyria's skin glowed in the dark, a soft nebula of violet light that illuminated Jacob's scars. He held her anchored to him, his hands mapping the curves of her spine. It was silent, save for their breathing and the creak of the cooling metal. It felt like they were the only two beings in the universe, suspended in a private void where titles, wars, and bounties could not reach them. "We are just stars," Illyria whispered against his lips, her legs wrapped around him as they drifted, caught in each other's gravity. "Then let's burn," Jacob replied. Darwin found the signal 2 days later. It was a ghost transmission bouncing off a derelict relay station deep in the Sunder. The encryption was Zetherian, but the underlying carrier wave was Exarch. "It's him," Jacob said, looking at the frequency analysis. "It's Varix. He is not hiding," Illyria said, studying the coordinates. "He is waiting." The coordinates led to a massive derelict ship drifting in the shadow of a gas giant. It was an ancient Exarch dreadnought, a relic from the First War, its hull pitted and scarred. It looked like a dead whale floating in a sea of black ink. Jacob docked the scavenger's prayer at the manual airlock. He checked his weapons. He had fabricated a new pulse rifle from salvage parts. And Illyria carried a jagged energy blade she had taken from a dead bounty hunter. They moved through the silent ship. The interior was a nightmare of biology and technology. The walls were covered in the same gray, veiny growth they had seen on Sanctum. It pulsed wetly as they passed. "This ship isn't dead," Jacob whispered. "It's sleeping." They found Varix on the bridge. He was standing before the main viewport, looking out at the swirling storms of the gas giant. He wore his pristine white general's uniform, but something was wrong with the way he stood. He was too still. "Cousin," Illyria called out, her voice echoing in the vast ribbed chamber. Varix turned. Illyria gasped. Half of Varix's face was gone, replaced by a shimmering chrome lattice that merged seamlessly with his flesh. His left eye was a glowing red optic sensor. Silver veins ran down his neck, disappearing under his collar. "You came," Varix said. His voice was layered, the human tone overlaid with a metallic harmonic. "I knew you would. The bond of blood is a powerful algorithm." "What have you done to yourself?" Illyria asked, horror rising in her throat. "I have evolved," Varix said, spreading his arms. He gestured to the ship around him. "You call this an invasion, Illyria. You call it a disease. You are small-minded. The Exarch does not destroy. They preserve. They archive." He walked toward them. His footsteps clanged heavily on the deck. "Our empire is dying and we are stagnant. We debate rituals while the universe moves on. I saw the end coming. So I made a deal. I offered them a doorway, and in exchange, they offered us eternity." "You let them infect you," Jacob said, raising his rifle. "You're just a puppet." "No!" Varix roared, his human eye wide with fanaticism. "I am the savior. I let the machine in to save the bloodline. When the assimilation is complete, the Zetherian race will be immortal. No more death, no more pain, just the perfection of the code." He tapped a console on the command deck. A low thrumming vibration began to shake the ship. Outside the viewport, the space warped. "I have activated the beacon." Varix smiled. "The fleet is not weeks away." "Commander, it is here." The relay is open. Jacob fired. The pulse round struck Varix in the chest. but a shimmering energy shield absorbed the impact. Varix didn't even flinch. He raised his hand, and the floor plates beneath Jacob erupted. Metal tentacles lashed out from the deck, wrapping around Jacob's legs. He shouted, firing wildly, severing two of them, but a third wrapped around his waist and slammed him into the bulkhead. "Jacob!" Illyria screamed. She charged Varix, the energy blade humming. Varix caught her wrist mid-swing. His grip was crushing, mechanical strength far beyond anything organic. "Little cousin," Varix sighed. "You were always so emotional." He backhanded her. The blow threw her across the bridge. She slid across the floor, dazed, tasting blood. Jacob struggled against the tentacles. He saw Varix looming over Illyria. "Get up," Jacob roared, straining against the metal coils until his ribs creaked. "Fight him, Illyria!" Varix drew a sword from his hip, not a Zitherian blade, but a jagged shard of exarch metal that seemed to absorb the light. "I will start the collection with you," Varix said, raising the blade over Illyria. "Your genetic code is premium." Illyria looked up. She saw the monster that wore her cousin's face. She saw the madness in his human eye and the cold calculation in his machine eye. She thought of her mother fading away in silence. She thought of Jacob floating in the dark, holding her. She was not going to fade. She didn't try to block the sword. She rolled forward, inside his guard. She drove her shoulder into his knee, the organic knee, not the machine one. Varix stumbled. Illyria scrambled up, gripping her energy blade with both hands. "For the bloodline!" she screamed. She thrust the blade upward, not into his chest, into the glowing red optic sensor on the machine half of his face. The blade crunched through the lens and sank deep into the cybernetic brain tissue behind it. Varix froze. The red light in his eye flickered and died. The human half of his face went slack with shock. He dropped his sword. He reached up, touching the blade protruding from his skull. "Illyria," he whispered, his voice suddenly entirely human again, sounding like the boy she had played with in the palace gardens. It is so cold." He fell backward. The tentacles holding Jacob went limp, retreating into the floor. Jacob dropped to the deck, gasping for air. He scrambled over to Illyria. She was standing over the body, shaking violently. She wasn't looking at the monster. She was looking at her cousin. "I had to," she sobbed, the tears flowing freely now. He was already gone. Jacob pulled her into his arms. I know. You did good." He looked at the console Varix had activated. The beacon was still pulsing. "We have to go," Jacob said. "The fleet is coming." He saw something glowing on Varix's belt. It wasn't a weapon. It was a data module, pulsating with the same blue light as the mind core they had seen on Sanctum. Jacob ripped it free. "This is it," he said, examining the device. "This is the master key. The override codes for the planetary defense grid." He had it on him to lower the shields when the fleet arrived. He looked at Illyria. "This proves everything. It proves the infiltration. It proves the treason." Illyria wiped her eyes. She looked at the dead body of her cousin one last time, then turned to the viewport. Space was tearing open. Massive, jagged shapes were emerging from the warp points. The Exarch Armada. "They are coming for the capital," she said, her voice hardening. Jacob grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the airlock. "It is not your crown they are after." "Illyria," he said, looking back at the twisted fusion of flesh and metal on the floor. "It is your body, your mind. They want to turn your people into that." They ran for the ship as the shadow of the invasion fell over them. The time for running was over. The time for war had finally arrived. Zitherian Prime did not look like a planet at war. From the upper atmosphere, The capital city was a sprawling mandala of white light and crystal spires, glowing with the arrogance of a civilization that believed itself untouchable. But down in the docking bays of the commercial district, the cracks were beginning to show. The freighter. The scavenger's prayer touched down in Bay 42, listed on the manifest as a transport for textile imports from the outer rim. The ship groaned as the landing struts settled, the heavy industrial engines whining in protest against the planet's high gravity. Jacob Rain stood by the airlock, adjusting the collar of a rough-spun merchant's tunic. It was itchy, ill-fitting, and smelled of damp wool, but it concealed the body armor he wore underneath. Beside him, Illyria adjusted a heavy veil that obscured her face. She wore the drab gray robes of a servant, a disguise so beneath her station that no guard would ever think to look twice. "Ready to walk into the lion's den?" Jacob asked, checking the charge on the concealed pistol tucked into his boot. "It is not a den of lions," Illyria replied, her voice muffled by the fabric. "It is a nest of vipers, and we are walking barefoot." The ramp hissed open. The dock was crowded with shouting stevedores and cargo drones. The air smelled of ozone and panic. Rumors of the fall of Sanctum had reached the core. The price of grain had tripled in 6 hours. The price of a ticket off-world had quadrupled. They moved through the chaos, heads down. They did not head for the main concourse. Instead, they moved toward the waste reclamation tunnels that ran beneath the pristine streets. A contact from Silas's network was waiting for them in the shadows of a filtration pump. He was a nervous Etherian with twitchy antennae, clutching a data pad. "You are the package?" the contact whispered, looking around wildly. "We are the delivery," Jacob corrected. "Get us inside the perimeter." The journey through the Undercity was a descent into the guts of the Empire. They crawled through service ducts that hadn't been opened in a century, bypassed sensor grids using codes that Illyria had memorized from her childhood explorations, and climbed maintenance ladders that seemed to stretch on forever. When they finally emerged, it was behind a tapestry in the Hall of Ancestors, a quiet corridor just off the main throne room. Illyria pulled off her veil. Her face was smeared with grime, but her eyes were burning with a terrifying resolve. She smoothed her gray robes. "I have no crown," she whispered. "I have no armor." "You have the truth," Jacob said, handing her the Exarch mind core. It was wrapped in a cloth, pulsating with a faint, sickening rhythm. "And you have me." He drew his pistol, holding it low against his leg. "Let's go make some noise." The throne room was in session. The massive doors, carved from solid pearl, were sealed, but the shouting from within was audible even in the corridor. Jacob didn't knock. He aimed his pistol at the locking mechanism and fired 3 rounds of high-explosive tips. The mechanism shattered. The doors groaned and slid open, jamming halfway. Jacob stepped through the smoke, weapon raised. Illyria walked in beside him, her head high, clutching the cloth-wrapped bundle like a newborn child. The room fell silent. The 7 elders of the council froze. High Counselor Zalor stood at the podium, his mouth open mid-sentence. General Varex's second-in-command, a severe woman named Kalis, reached for her weapon. "Don't," Jacob warned, swinging his aim to her chest. "My finger is twitchy, and I haven't slept in 3 days." "Guards!" Zalor shrieked, pointing a trembling finger. "Seize them! The traitor has returned! Kill them! Hold!" Illyria's voice cracked through the air like a whip. It was not the voice of a princess. It was the voice of a queen. It carried the weight of command, amplified by the acoustics of the room. The royal guards hesitated, looking between the High Counselor and the heir. "I am not a traitor," Illyria shouted, stepping into the center of the room. She ripped the gray servant's robe from her shoulders, revealing the torn and bloodied combat suit she had worn on Sanctum. I have fought for this empire while you debated. I have bled for this throne while you polished it. She threw the bundle onto the obsidian table in the center of the room. The cloth fell away, revealing the Exarch mind core. It was a jagged metallic heart, glowing with a malevolent red light. Wires and wet organic tendrils hung from it, twitching on the polished stone. What is this abomination? Counselor Calith gasped, recoiling. This is what my cousin became, Illyria said, her voice trembling with suppressed grief. This is the device I pulled from General Varrix's corpse. He was not recruiting the Exarch. He was one of them. Lies! Zaelor slammed his fist on the podium. She has murdered the general and brought Terran filth into this chamber to stage a coup. Jacob stepped forward. Look at the readout, old man. He shot the lock off a display interface on the wall and jacked a data cable from the mind core into the room's projection system. The hologram above the table flickered. It didn't show a map. It showed code. It was a stream of data, ancient and complex. But mixed within the machine language were biometric files, names, dates, access codes. This is a colonization manifest, Jacob said, his voice echoing in the silence. Varrix wasn't the only one. The infection is already here. It's in the grid. It's in the defense satellites. It's in the bloody air filters. The counselors murmured, fear rippling through them. They looked at the code. They recognized the encryption. Then, the mind core screamed. It wasn't a sound. It was a digital shriek that blasted through the palace speakers, shattering windows and bringing the guards to their knees. The red light on the device flared, turning blinding white. It's active, Jacob yelled. Illyria, get back! The mind core dissolved into a stream of liquid metal, flowing into the data port Jacob had connected. The holographic map of the galaxy above them turned red. Not just the border worlds, all of it. Planetary shield integrity failing. A mechanical voice announced from the walls. It was the city's AI. But the voice was distorted, slowed down, heavy with static. Firewall breached. Defense grid offline. Welcome, Exarch. The sky outside the massive transparasteel windows darkened. It was not night, it was ships. Thousands of them. They dropped from the clouds like jagged knives, tearing through the atmosphere. The friction of their entry turned the sky into a sheet of fire. The Exarch fleet had arrived. We are betrayed, Calith whispered, sinking into her chair. Panic erupted. The counselors scrambled for the exits. The guards looked at their weapons, realizing their energy pikes were useless against orbital bombardment. Jacob grabbed Illyria's arm. The shields are down, he said, his face pale. If those dreadnoughts reach bombardment range, this city is ash in 10 minutes. We have to evacuate, Illyria said, grabbing a comlink from a fallen guard. Evacuation is too slow, Jacob said. He looked at the sky. He looked at the swarming enemy fighters. Someone has to buy them time. He turned to Illyria. Get the civilians to the catacombs. The geothermal shielding will hide them from the sensors. Lead them. Illyria, be the queen they need. And what will you do? Illyria asked, dread pooling in her stomach. Jacob looked toward the private hangar bay elevators. There is a squadron of interceptors in the royal hangar, he said. They are old, manual controls, not linked to the infected grid. You cannot fight a fleet. Jacob, she screamed, grabbing his lapels. I don't have to beat them, he said. I just have to make them look at me. I have to draw their fire away from the city long enough for you to get underground. He kissed her. It was hard, fast, and tasted of goodbye. Go! He roared, shoving her toward the servants' entrance. Jacob, go! He turned and sprinted toward the hangar lifts. Illyria watched him go, her heart breaking in her chest. Then, the ceiling shuddered as the first bombs fell. She turned to the terrified counselors and the frozen guards. Move, she commanded, her voice cutting through the panic. Into the tunnels. Everyone, if you want to live, you follow me. The atmosphere above Zetherian Prime was a chaotic soup of plasma fire and debris. Jacob sat in the cockpit of a Mark V interceptor. It was a beautiful ship, sleek and fast, but it felt fragile against the behemoths descending from orbit. He yanked the control stick hard to the left, rolling the ship to avoid a stream of green energy fire. The G-forces slammed him into his seat. This is Rain, broadcasting on open channels, he shouted into the comms. All available pilots form up on my wing. We are the only thing standing between those ships and the ground. 3 other fighters formed up behind him, rogue guards who had managed to scramble. Target the lead dreadnought, Jacob ordered. Aim for the navigation array. Blind them. He dove. The Exarch ship was the size of a city. Its surface was crawling with smaller drone fighters. Jacob ignored them. He pushed the throttle to 110%. The engine screamed. He strafed the hull of the dreadnought, his laser cannons carving deep scars into the metal. He wasn't doing real damage, but he was annoying them. The dreadnought turned its massive turrets toward him. That's it, Jacob grunted, sweat stinging his eyes. Look at me, you ugly bastard. Below him, the city was burning. He could see the refugee columns moving like ants toward the tunnel entrances. He had to hold the line. Illyria stood at the entrance to the Great Archive, which served as the gateway to the deep underground. Thousands of civilians were pouring past her, nobles, servants, merchants, all stripped of rank by fear. She held a data pad, monitoring the airspace. One signal was burning brighter than the others. A single blue dot dancing in a sea of red. Jacob, she whispered. The ground shook violently. Dust rained down from the vaulted ceiling. Princess, a guard shouted. We have to seal the blast doors. The bombardment is getting closer. Not yet, Illyria yelled. There are still people on the bridge. She looked at the datapad. The blue dot was surrounded. Jacob's voice crackled over her personal channel. It was filled with static and the screaming of proximity alarms. Illyria, are you there? I am here. Jacob, she said, pressing the comms unit to her ear, closing her eyes against the dust. Get them inside, he rasped. I can't hold them off much longer. My port engine is gone. Shields are at 5%. Return to base. Jacob, she pleaded, you have done enough. There is no base to return to, he said. And if I turn back now, they will strafe the tunnel entrance. A massive explosion rocked the city above. Jacob's voice became suddenly calm. The soldier was gone. The man remained. Illyria, listen to me. I am listening. She sobbed. I never had a home, he said. Not since Earth, not since the war. You were the first place that felt like solid ground. Jacob, please, if I don't come back, know I died holding the stars for you. The transmission spiked with a deafening screech of tearing metal. Jacob! She looked at the data pad. The blue dot flared white, then vanished. Above the city, a fireball blossomed in the sky. It wasn't an enemy ship. It was a small, sleek interceptor, spiraling down, trailing smoke and fire. It crashed into the ruins of the West Wing, miles from the tunnel entrance. Illyria screamed. It was a sound that tore her throat raw. She dropped the data pad. Seal the doors, she ordered the guards. But Princess, you seal them. She turned and ran. Not into the tunnels. She ran out into the burning city. She ran toward the crash site. The city was a nightmare-scape. Buildings had collapsed into the streets. The air was thick with ash that coated her throat like cement. Exarch drones were landing in the plazas, harvesting the dead. Illyria didn't care. She used her knowledge of the secret passages to bypass the patrols. She climbed over rubble that tore her hands and ruined her boots. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs felt like lead. She reached the west wing. The impact crater was massive. In the center of it lay the twisted wreckage of the interceptor. It was burning. "Jacob!" she screamed. Sliding down the side of the crater, she reached the cockpit. The canopy was shattered. Jacob was inside. He was broken. A piece of the fuselage had pierced his side. His face was covered in blood. His breathing was a wet, shallow rattle. He looked at her. His eyes were unfocused, glassy. "You shouldn't be here," he wheezed. Illyria ripped the canopy open with strength she didn't know she possessed. She pulled him out, dragging him onto the cool stone of a shattered fountain nearby. She pressed her hands to the wound in his side. The blood pumped out, dark and fast, too fast. "No, no, no," she chanted. "You do not get to die, you do not get to leave me." Jacob smiled weakly. His hand came up, trembling, to touch her face. He smeared blood on her cheek. Hell of a fight. "Princess." His hand dropped. His chest stopped moving. "Jacob?" Silence. "Jacob!" She shook him. His head lolled to the side. Illyria stared at him. The grief was so large it threatened to stop her own heart. Then she remembered the royal biolink. It was a legend, a myth from the founding of her bloodline. The first kings and queens could share life force. It was forbidden because the cost was terrible. It required a perfect resonance, a bond of soul. She didn't care about the cost. She placed her hands on his chest, directly over his heart. She closed her eyes. She reached for the connection they had forged in the stasis pod, the bond they had deepened in the dark of the freighter. "Come back," she commanded silently. "Take it. Take it all." She pushed. She didn't push with her hands. She pushed with her essence. A violet light erupted from her skin. It flowed down her arms like liquid fire. It poured into Jacob's chest. The pain was excruciating. It felt like she was being drained of her blood, drop by drop. Her vision went gray. The vibrant purple of her skin began to fade, turning a pale, sickly white. She gasped, her body arching, but she didn't break the contact. "Live. Live. Live." The wound in Jacob's side began to knit together. The color returned to his face. Illyria felt cold, a cold deeper than the void. Her heart stuttered, just a little more. She poured the last of her strength into him. With a massive, gasping breath, Jacob arched off the ground. His eyes snapped open. He sucked in air like a drowning man breaking the surface. Illyria collapsed. She fell forward, landing on his chest. She was limp, her breathing almost non-existent. Jacob blinked, the world swimming into focus. He felt the phantom heat in his chest. He looked down. Illyria lay on him. She was gray. Her skin, usually so luminous, was dull and ash-like. "Illyria?" he rasped. He sat up, holding her. She was light, too light. He checked her pulse. It was a faint flutter, like a dying bird. "What did you do?" he whispered, horror dawning on him. Her eyelids fluttered open. Her violet eyes were dim, the fire gone. She smiled. It was the ghost of a smile. "I command you to live," she whispered. Jacob pulled her tight against him, rocking her. "You stupid, stubborn." A screech of metal interrupted them. Jacob looked up. The Exarch had found them. 3 massive walker drones crested the rim of the crater. Their red optical sensors locked onto the 2 figures in the ruin. Their weapon arms spun up, glowing with lethal energy. There was nowhere to run. Jacob had no weapon. Illyria couldn't walk. Jacob looked at the machines, and then he looked down at the woman in his arms. He didn't feel fear. He felt a strange, absolute calm. He stood up, lifting Illyria with him. He held her close, shielding her body with his own. "I never needed a crown," she whispered into his neck, her voice barely audible over the hum of the charging weapons. "I only needed you." Jacob kissed the top of her head. He looked at the Exarch. He tightened his grip on her. "Come and get us," he roared at the machines, a challenge that echoed off the ruined stones. The Exarch fired. The world vanished in a flash of white light. The white light that swallowed the world was not death. It was salvation, delivered at 3,000 meters per second. The Exarch Walker drones did not fire. They disintegrated. A torrent of magnetic railgun rounds, fired from the screaming engines of a descending freighter, turned the ancient machines into scrap metal before their logic processors could register the threat. The scavenger's prayer roared over the crater, its engines venting black smoke, thrusters burning hot enough to fuse the sand into glass. The ship slammed onto the cobblestones of the ruined plaza, crushing a fountain beneath its landing struts. The cargo ramp dropped with a heavy clang. "Get in!" a voice amplified by external speakers bellowed. It was Silas, the cyborg salvager. "Unless you two are planning to fight an armada with a hug, I suggest you move." Jacob stared at the ship, his brain taking a fraction of a second to process the reprieve. He did not hesitate. He scooped Illyria up, her body limp and drained of color, and sprinted for the ramp. They hit the metal deck just as the Exarch aerial drones swarmed the position, strafing the ground where they had stood moments before. The ramp hissed shut, sealing out the fire and the ash. Jacob collapsed against the bulkhead, sliding down until he hit the floor. He held Illyria tight against his chest. She was barely breathing, her skin a dull, translucent gray. "Darwin!" Jacob shouted, his voice cracking. "Get a medical drone! Now!" The holographic avatar of the old Earth professor flickered into existence. He looked down at them with a mixture of scientific curiosity and digital concern. "Her vital signs are critical," the AI observed. "She has transferred nearly 90% of her bioelectric energy to you. Commander? By all biological laws, she should be dead. It seems royalty is more durable than I calculated." "Fix her," Jacob growled, pressing his hand over her heart. "I can stabilize her," Darwin said, "but I cannot restore the energy she gave you. Only time can do that, and time is a currency we do not possess." The ship shuddered violently as a plasma torpedo impacted the shields. "We are taking heavy fire," Silas shouted from the cockpit. "I can't break the orbit. Rain! The sky is a solid wall of Exarch steel." Jacob looked at Illyria. Her eyelids fluttered. She looked up at him, her violet eyes dim and hazy. "Jacob," she whispered, the sound barely a breath. The city is dying," Jacob said grimly. "Then we have to save it," she said. She tried to sit up, but her arms trembled and failed. "You can't even stand," Jacob said, gently pushing her back down. "I don't need to stand to give an order," she wheezed. "Help me up. Commander." "That is a direct command." Jacob looked at her. He saw the steel in her spine that no exhaustion could break. He nodded. He lifted her, supporting her weight entirely, and half carried her to the cockpit. The view outside the viewport was apocalyptic. The capital of Zetharian Prime was burning. The Exarch fleet hung in the low atmosphere like a gathering of vultures, their dark hulls blotting out the suns. The planetary shield was gone. The defense grid was corrupted. The Crimson Guard on the ground were being slaughtered in formatted lines of battle. "They are fighting like Zetharian," Jacob muttered, watching a squad of gold-armored soldiers get mowed down by a heavy repeater because they refused to break formation. "They are dying with honor." We need to change the rules, Illyria said, leaning heavily against the navigation console. Jacob looked at Darwin. Do you still have access to the reliquary database? Jacob asked. I do, Darwin replied, though I fail to see how a history book will help us against a particle cannon. The reliquary isn't just history, Jacob said, his mind racing, formulating a plan that was reckless, dangerous, and entirely human. It is a record of every warlord, every chaotic variable, every act of madness and unpredictable genius in the last 10,000 years. It is the sum total of organic chaos. He turned to Silas. Get us to the central spire. Silas turned his mechanical eye toward Jacob. The spire? That is ground zero. Rain. The Exarch are swarming it. They are trying to hack the global broadcast node. Exactly, Jacob said. We are going to let them. The flight to the central spire was a blur of evasive maneuvers and near-death collisions. Silas flew the heavy freighter like a starfighter, scraping paint off the sides of burning skyscrapers, ducking under collapsing bridges. They crashed, literally crashed, into the grand plaza at the base of the spire. The ship plowed through a marble statue of Illyria's grandfather and came to a grinding halt at the foot of the massive crystal tower. The ramp dropped. Jacob stood there, checking the charge on a pulse rifle he had pulled from the ship's armory. He wore a scavenged flak jacket over his torn clothes. Darwin. You are with me, Jacob said, grabbing a portable data drive. Silas, keep the engines running. If we aren't back in 20 minutes, leave us. I will wait until the heat death of the universe. Silas grunted, cocking a massive shotgun. But 20 minutes is all the ammo I have. Illyria stood up. She was swaying, but she had found a vibro blade and strapped it to her waist. I am coming, she said. Jacob started to argue, then stopped. He saw the look in her eyes. She was not asking. Stay close, he said. They charged into the spire. The lobby was a war zone. Exarch drones were cutting through the blast doors of the server room. They turned as the humans entered, their optical sensors flaring red. Jacob didn't pause. He didn't duel. He fought with the brutal efficiency of a man who had run out of patience. He fired a grenade launcher into the center of the cluster, blowing 3 drones apart, then switched to the rifle to clean up the stragglers. Silas moved like a tank, his shotgun roaring, blasting machine parts across the polished floor. They breached the server room. The central interface, a massive column of pulsing light, stood in the center. Hook him up, Jacob yelled, throwing the data drive to Illyria. She caught it, sliding across the floor to avoid a laser bolt, and slammed the drive into the port. Darwin's avatar materialized above the console. He looked enormous, his form expanded by the surge of power from the spire. I am in, Darwin announced. The Exarch network is attempting to consume me. They are aggressive. Let them in, Jacob ordered, firing over his shoulder at the door where more drones were pouring in. Open the floodgates. Upload the reliquary. All of it. All of it? Darwin paused. Commander, that database contains the psych profiles of madmen. It contains the poetry of extinct romantics. It contains the chaotic logic of the human condition. Upload it, Jacob roared as a plasma bolt grazed his shoulder. Give them a virus they can't calculate. Give them humanity. Darwin smiled, a distinctly wicked human smile. Deploying chaos, the AI said, high above the city, aboard the Exarch mothership. The hive mind paused. It had been processing tactical data. It had been calculating the optimal geometric vectors for the extermination of the Zetherian species. It was a creature of pure binary. 1, 0, yes, no, life, death. Then, the data stream changed. It wasn't receiving codes anymore. It was receiving feelings. It received the rage of a Terran warlord who burned a world for a lover. It received the grief of a Zetherian mother losing a child. It received the illogical, paradoxical concept of self-sacrifice, the idea that a unit would delete itself to save another unit with zero tactical value. The hive mind tried to categorize the data. It tried to find the logic. Error does not compute. Paradox detected. Love is inefficient. Rage is counterproductive. Hope is a statistical impossibility. The logic loops began to overheat. The certainty of the machine mind fractured. On the ground, the result was immediate and terrifying. The Exarch drones froze. In the server room, a walker drone that had Jacob pinned in a corner suddenly stopped. Its weapon arm lowered. Its optical sensor flickered from red to blue to white. It looked at its own metallic hand. It looked at Jacob. Then, it let out a screech of electronic confusion and turned, firing its weapon into the drone beside it. "It's working!" Illyria shouted. It wasn't just stopping them. It was driving them mad. The infection spread up the orbital tether to the fleet. The dreadnoughts began to drift out of formation. Firing solutions were abandoned. Shields dropped. The Exarchs were cannibalizing themselves. Ships rammed into other ships. Drones tore each other apart in the streets. Unable to process the conflicting commands of exterminate and empathize, Jacob dropped his empty rifle and leaned against the console, breathing hard. "We did it," he rasped. Darwin's avatar flickered. "Commander, a problem has arisen," the AI said. His voice was no longer amused. It was urgent. "What?" "The Exarch mothership cannot process the data. It is initiating a hard reset. It is attempting to purge the corrupted nodes by collapsing the local grid." "English! Darwin!" Jacob yelled. "They are imploding the spire," Darwin said. "They are creating a localized singularity to wipe out the source of the signal. We have 30 seconds before this building becomes a black hole. We have to go," Silas shouted from the doorway. Jacob looked at the console. The upload bar was at 99%. "If we disconnect now..." "They reset," Jacob said, staring at the screen. "They clear the cache, reboot, and kill everyone." He looked at the data cable. It had to be held. The connection was physical. "Go," Jacob said calmly. "What?" Illyria stepped toward him. "Get to the ship," Jacob said. He didn't look at her. He couldn't. If he looked at her, he wouldn't be able to do it. "I have to hold the connection manually until the upload finishes. The surge will trigger the singularity." "No," Illyria whispered. "No! Silas, get her out of here!" Jacob roared. Silas grabbed Illyria's arm. She fought him. She was weak, drained of power, but she fought with the ferocity of a wild animal. "I will not leave you," she screamed. Jacob grabbed the data cable with both hands. The energy surged through him. His body arched. Sparks flew from the console. "Go! Illyria! Save your people!" Silas dragged her back. She kicked. She scratched. She screamed his name until her throat tore. The spire began to groan. The walls buckled. Gravity began to warp, pulling debris toward the center of the room. Jacob looked up. He met her eyes across the widening gap. "I told you," he gasped through the pain of the energy coursing through him. "I'd die holding the stars for you." Silas dragged her through the blast doors. The doors slammed shut. Illyria broke free. She didn't run for the ship. She ran for the manual override of the door. "Silas, help me!" The cyborg looked at the door, then at the woman. He cursed in 3 languages. He grabbed the manual wheel. They heaved. The door cracked open. The room inside was a vortex of white light and swirling debris. Jacob was in the center, glowing like a sun, his body disintegrating into the energy field. He wasn't screaming. He was smiling. Illyria didn't think. She didn't calculate. She dove. She threw herself into the gravity well. She crawled across the floor, the pressure crushing her bones, the light blinding her. "Jacob!" He saw her. His eyes widened in horror. "Go back!" he mouthed. She reached him. She grabbed his belt. She anchored herself to the floor with one hand and wrapped her other arm around his waist. She leaned into his ear, fighting the roar of the collapsing universe. "If you die now, I will follow you," she whispered. She activated her biolink one last time, not to heal him, but to bind them. She wove her life force into his, creating a cocoon of violet energy around them both. The upload hit 100%. The singularity detonated. There was no sound, only a sudden, violent expansion of silence. The spire vanished. The city vanished. The world went white. Darkness, fluid, warmth. Illyria floated in the void. It was not the cold void of space. It was thick, viscous, and smelled of nutrient gel. She drifted for an eternity. Memories flashed before her closed eyes. A bar fight on a mining moon. A stolen kiss in a corridor. A man holding a ceiling up with his bare shoulders. He will fight. She gasped, her lungs filling with oxygenated liquid. The tank drained. The glass shield hissed and retracted. Illyria fell forward, her wet body hitting the cold medical floor. She coughed, retching up the fluid, her limbs shaking uncontrollably. "Easy, Highness, easy." Strong hands helped her up. Not human hands, Zetharian hands. She looked up. It was a healer, dressed in the white robes of the royal ward. "Where?" she croaked. "You are in the palace medical wing," the healer said softly. "You have been in the tank for 6 weeks." 6 weeks? Illyria scrambled to her feet, slipping on the wet floor. She grabbed the healer's robe. "The war?" "Over," the healer said, smiling. The Exarch fleet collapsed. They simply stopped fighting. They drifted into the suns or shut down. The galaxy is safe. Illyria looked around the room. It was bright, clean, and rebuilt. "Jacob," she whispered. The name felt like glass in her mouth. The healer's smile faded slightly. He hesitated. He was found in the rubble of the spire. "With you." "Is he alive?" Illyria demanded, her voice rising to the tone of command that had rallied armies. The healer nodded toward the balcony doors. "He refused the tanks," the healer said. "He said he preferred to heal the old way." "With scars." Illyria didn't wait. She ran. She was wearing only a thin medical gown, and her feet were bare. But she ran through the corridors of the palace. The palace was damaged. There were scorch marks on the walls, statues missing heads. But there were also scaffolds, workers. The sound of hammers and drills. It was the sound of life. She burst onto the royal balcony. It was night. The twin pale moons of Zetharian hung low in the sky, casting a silver light over the garden. The garden was overgrown, wild but blooming. He was standing by the railing, looking out over the city. He was leaning on a cane. His walk was uneven. He wore a simple black tunic, loose and unadorned. Illyria stopped. She couldn't breathe. "Jacob?" He turned. His face was a map of the war. A jagged white scar ran from his temple to his jawline. His hair was grayer at the temples. He looked tired. He looked older. But his eyes, those storm ocean eyes, were clear. He didn't speak. He just opened his arms. Illyria collided with him. She buried her face in his chest, inhaling the scent of him, soap, night air, and life. She sobbed, letting the 6 weeks of fear pour out of her. He held her. He dropped the cane and held her with both arms, steady and strong. "You waited," she wept. "You waited for me." "I didn't have a choice," he rumbled, his voice rough with emotion. You tied your soul to mine, princess. If you hadn't woken up, I don't think I would have either. She pulled back, looking at his face, tracing the new scar with her fingers. I broke you, she whispered. No, Jacob said, covering her hand with his. You put me back together. He looked out at the city. The lights were coming back on, grid by grid. The council is gone. Illyria, Zalor fled. The others resigned in disgrace. The people are calling for a queen. They are calling for you. Illyria looked at the city. She looked at the throne room behind them. She thought of the weight of the crown, the silence of the court, the isolation. Then she looked at Jacob. She saw the man who had crossed the galaxy, fought monsters, and walked into a black hole for her. I don't want it, she said softly. Jacob raised an eyebrow. It's a nice chair. Good lumbar support. I don't want the chair. Jacob, I want the stars. She took his hand, interlacing their fingers. I want to see the galaxy you told me about. I want to see Earth. I want to see the mining moons and the nebula drifts. I want to live. Jacob. Not a rule. Jacob smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that reached his eyes and softened the hard lines of his face. You know that means we're unemployed, right? He teased. No royal stipend, no palace guards. Just us and a beat-up ship. Sounds perfect, Illyria said. Jacob tightened his grip on her hand. He pulled her close, kissing her forehead under the light of the pale moons. I'm retired, Illyria. I'm done with war. He looked deep into her eyes. I'll fight again, he whispered, the promise hanging in the cool night air, but only if it's for you. The wreckage of the palace was slowly being cleared away, stone by stone. The history of the Zetherian Empire was being written not in the blood of conquest, but in the ink of survival. In the lower archives, a new High Counselor sat before a recording console. He was young, one of the survivors of the tunnels. He looked at the empty throne on the monitor screen, then at the footage of a battered freighter lifting off from the city spaceport, heading toward the open vector of the unknown. He began to speak, his voice recording the final entry of the Great War. The galaxy will remember the fleets. They will remember the fire that fell from the sky and the silence that followed. But we must remember the spark that lit the dark. He paused, watching the freighter disappear into the warp jump, a streak of light vanishing into the infinite. History is not made by fleets, the counselor said. It is made by the choices of the desperate. War drums once echoed in the void, and the universe held its breath. And the princess whispered, "Call the human. He will fight." The counselor closed the file. The screen went black. Outside, the stars burned bright and clear.